this Carolina multifamily connection I started about a year and a half ago. Again, during the COVID time, I'm based out here in New York, New Jersey area. I was literally, studying multifamily, and I had the opportunity to, I guess, if you will, virtually crash various different meetups that normally would be in person, and join. I started looking in Asheville, North Carolina. I think it was Raleigh, places like that. And, eventually I settled in on Greenville, North Carolina. But just the idea of the meetup itself was a way to connect people like all of us are in different areas right now, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina. So to me, I started to think ahead and I said, let me create this and keep this going, because eventually we're going to move out in person. But we want to have an outlet where we can connect out-of-state investors with Carolina-focused investors and operators. So that's been the purpose of this. Typically, I have a speaker who will come, but I kind of changed the format of this. Like, I want to start more of a discussion. I think this is we have an intimate room here. We can learn from each other. We can talk about how we are looking at different markets. All of us mentioned some of the markets that we invest in already, but how do you find new markets? Some of these markets are very hot, like, for instance, Charlotte, Atlanta that we talked about. So what do you look for in markets that may be, have up and growing or path of progress or those types of things? So that's going to be the purpose of today's presentation. And then we'll connect afterwards and do some networking. Hold on one second here while I share the screen. So yeah, while I pull it up, I'll talk a little bit about what when I first started, again, about 2.5 years ago, it was a small group similar to this, and we started to discuss what markets were we going to look into. Again, being up in here, you look at various metrics, jobs, migration patterns, and one of the first areas that dropped out, there was probably about 5 that we put together. Jacksonville, Florida, Huntsville, Alabama, Raleigh, and Columbus, Ohio actually was one of those. I know, Ahmed, you're looking over there. And all these were sticking out because they had either there was jobs or there was a good student base nearby, technology jobs in particular, and then places where the shift from larger cities to smaller areas that were attractive was a major point for these cities to do well. So originally, as I mentioned, we focused in on Raleigh, North Carolina. And then once we started to look into Raleigh, realize like how competitive that area was, because obviously there's institutions that are coming in and you're competing with various players like us who already are established, and it quickly was a market that said, well, okay, we got to, go elsewhere. And for me, the next area that quickly jumped out was Asheville, North Carolina. And I started to look into Asheville, North Carolina. And Asheville, if anyone's, obviously been there, but it's, a great place, very interesting area. But, there's a large like retiree section or segment of the population, and then also a lot of young people that move there for the arts. But it's also in the mountains, and you can't really build that much more. So the inventory was pretty tight. So I just there wasn't a lot of us we're talking about value add or looking for properties that we can come in there and fix, and there wasn't a lot of that there. So what was next? That was kind of how do I find the next place? And what was interesting is during a lot of conversations, people would mention to me like, hey, you should go and look at Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm so used to it. And I was like, I honestly never heard of Greenville, South Carolina until people were talking about it. So once I started to look at Greenville, South Carolina, what stood out was the first thing you want to do is you want to go out and go to you Google it, right? So you're like, well, what's special about this place? If you take Greenville, South Carolina on Wikipedia, there's basically only 70,000 people that are in the Greenville, South Carolina city. And that immediately didn't make sense because you're like, why are people, are they building so much in this area that's so small? Then you quickly learn that it's in an area of Greenville County, which is actually 500,000 people. And then quickly it comes into, this is actually an area that's even larger when you take into account the upstate South Carolina, which is about 1.4 million. And that's where some of the research and looking into, what's driving the growth in this particular area. And that's what, kind of want to talk about today. Once I can get this to share my screen here, it will be a good spot. I think now I'm almost there. Hold on a second. While we do that, has anyone here been to Greenville, South Carolina?
I had a barbecue there one time.
That's right. You and your barbecues. I forgot. And you were driving from?
I stayed in North Carolina for one night, and I was going to make it to Atlanta, Georgia. And I stopped on the way and spent about half day in South Carolina, which was really beautiful, to be honest with you. Didn't see the major attraction in Greenville, but I did drive through it, and it looked quite promising, new facilities growing up and stuff like that,
Yeah, so that, again, that's kind of, you were driving from the Charlotte area, I believe, right?
Correct.
Right. So then, that's it's almost equidistant between Charlotte and Atlanta. So, it's caught up right in the middle. All right. So Noah, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Now we're talking. All right, good. So this I already talked about. It's kind of my case study, this Greenville, South Carolina, how I stumbled upon Greenville, South Carolina. Again, jumping into Wikipedia, you'll see the population. You quickly realize, this is not just a small little city of 70,000, it's 500,000. It's an MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area, of 928,000, which is 60th in the US. And then this common statistical area. A CSA is a little bit more loosely defined. It ties in economic drivers. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be within a certain mile period, but, understanding that this whole upstate of South Carolina's call is about 1.5 million, which actually would be 40th in the US. So when you think about it, you don't even, you won't think of South Carolina, that part of South Carolina, as a populated area. So again, I mentioned I Googled it. And then the next thing, immediately is like, it's an auto engineering hub with Michelin, BMW headquarters, something really cool, which is called they have an inland port, which is basically like almost like a shipping staging area where they build all the cars, they shoot them down, straight down through the state into Charleston, which is one of the larger ports in the country. And then there you go, So that part, the infrastructure is set up. Engineering jobs are also attract educated workers who may do well and spend their money and want to live in a downtown, particularly if you're young. So that helped to spur the growth of the downtown. The history of South Carolina, of Greenville, South Carolina, was that this was a large mill town way back 100 years ago. And then in the 80s, like most of these towns in America that were mill towns, it fell apart. And through, I guess, proper planning, they were able to build up that downtown and focus it on greens and place to hike. And so these are the kind of things that you want to look for when you're looking at towns that you want to invest in. what are the future plans? I mentioned here on the bottom here was Trader Joe's Whole Foods effect. There was an article in 2020 that talked about the Whole Foods effect, which is basically rents in a particular area tend to increase by 5.8, almost 6%, comparable to other rents whenever a Trader Joe's or that area. So why is that important? Because if you are looking in a particular area, why not look at, you could do it right now while we're talking, Google up future openings of Trader Joe's, future openings of Whole Foods. I actually throw this Top Golf because I didn't realize that there's only about 25 or 28 Top Golfs. So there happened to be a Top Golf it's in Greer, near that area that I was talking about where the auto places. So these are some of the things that you want to do, because if the companies are paying these research, you want to follow that. The other one, there's so many of these. Actually, I'll stop and I'll pause. Like, does anybody use any other metrics like Starbucks or any other places that you're looking at?
Well, one thing that I always look out for, especially being down here, is breweries. So breweries are also a pretty cool thing to see pop up because it does attract the younger crowd, but not all the time, but it's a good diverse people, and it's just a great location, right, to go hang out, have a brew, and then eventually different projects develop around the brewery within the city area. So it's nice to see that type of construction.
Yep. And then here, this is actually a picture of Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I could tell you that when I was growing up, like, this part didn't look like this, and a lot of Brooklyn didn't look like that, period, either. So, when you look for these types of things, urban planning. There's meetings. You could actually attend a lot of these meetings. There's economic studies, and you can follow where these trends are. Right. Downtown waterfront revitalizations. So a lot of these cities are building around their waterfront, as they should. I mentioned the repositioning of mills and factories. You see that in a lot of these buildings that could be turned into restaurants and housing. One of my favorites, because I'm a sports fan, is actually looking at sports stadiums. And I don't mean major league sports stadiums, because obviously those are big cities, but like Class A or soccer. 2.5 years, some of you just came back or for Nashville, but Nashville just opened up a soccer stadium. And I remember reading about that a couple of years ago, and that area it was actually earmarked for a racetrack, I guess like a NASCAR, and the whole thing failed or whatever. But the point is, if you look at where they're looking to build this, that means they're trying to revitalize that area. So you kind of try to look for multifamily in those kind of places.
Yeah, Jared, we actually were at that soccer stadium, the Nashville FC, and it's crazy. It's built on the Nashville Fairgrounds. It's like this huge area, right? And when we were there, it's probably finished by now. We were there, 4 months ago. Everything around it, basically, there's construction all over the place. You see, we saw a multifamily shipping container community built. So they took shipping containers and they made apartments out of it. And it's I think it was 58 units or something like that. But you see all these unique projects, everything around the stadium being developed.
Yeah, and so that fairgrounds, right? They have been trying to do something with that for a very long time. Yeah, perfect. What is Wedgwood, Houston? Is that it? The area, you think it's Wedgwood, Houston? I'm not sure.
It's, I believe it's the northwest portion side of Nashville, something like that. I forget where it is exactly.
Yeah, so I do that, and a lot of people have been looking at Augusta, Georgia, they have a base. So there's Augusta, Georgia, and then there's North Augusta, which is actually in South Carolina, as an example. And they build like a Class A state baseball stadium there. So those are the things I saw. I saw that in Greensboro, and I saw that, that's my little secret there. So here, talking about breweries, Winston-Salem as a kind of a case study. About last June, I went out to Winston-Salem, and it was the first time that I went there, and I stayed at a hotel downtown, and I was with the family, and then we went out to dinner, and they had an art district, and then there was breweries. Anybody here been to Winston-Salem?
No.
So with Winston-Salem, I would say it's definitely again another one of these places where I guess out there they have the cigarettes and the factories, but there's this downtown area which is being built up. There's also the university, Wake Forest out there, and there's some jobs. But there's a lot of empty spaces, and then so now it's hard to tell sometimes between, when I say empty, like literally empty, where's the path of progress. So when I went there, it was unique, and there was this building that it was actually one of my lessons in multifamily, because everyone I knew was looking at this building. It was this like 50 unit in Winston-Salem. And when I went there, and I'm not lying, like it was terrible. There's no way. And the broker, have the nice, pretty OM and it's path of progress. And I'm like, this is not path of progress. There's nothing else around here. But you drive around and you find these breweries, and you start to see like how it's starting to change. I actually had quasi intel where I knew somebody was bidding on a property that was going to be housing students temporarily, while the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was building an art school in Winston-Salem. So you go in and you start to look around that area. I'm going to open up here a map. Hopefully So this is the Google My Maps or Google Maps tool, and it's one of I love maps, and I think it's a great tool to use, where things are in terms of path of progress. So it's a pretty simple tool. You could actually upload spreadsheets into, it has a style of, you just need to put in a certain format. You can Google that, and then you load it up into the map, and they have different layers. And layers are just basically like if you load up, a different sheet, and you can separate that and put different colors. So what I did was I had, the orange is basically these are various multifamily apartments. This is a B apartment. Let's see, 27 units. And then I had a separate. So I actually this was last summer. So I gave my daughter an assignment was to look up like cool places to go eat or whatever. So she picked like the pizzeria, there was a bakery and stuff. But the idea is if you start to look and drill down, like this is like a ramen noodle place, you kind of get an idea of there's a cluster, right? Like here goes your Camel City barbecue factory, right? That's that's the first place that Ahmed would go, right? And then Gonzalo will go here to the brewing. So if you're like us and you want to start going after units, like, hey, let's call this up, let's find out what this is. Actually, this is funny. The Southeast Gateway, this was a property that I looked at. And then that's the ultimate purpose of using the maps. And, some of the other things is looking future development. I think I loaded up where there was going to be other places that were going to be built. And then you can see different clusters. So, this part over here is near the college, Winston-Salem. So, this is kind of a case study of, of using the maps to learn an area and target. Right, let me get back into here and share. Excellent. All right. Is the presentation back? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So the next thing is following trends. You guys see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Micro cities. And this is something that I saw from being in Charlotte recently. That Ballantyne area, Gonzalo, that we caught up in, is, and I think this is it actually.
That's it. Yeah, there's the hotel is there.
And it's that the way Charlotte is built, it has that big circle of that. What route is that? That goes around the whole thing?
490 something, 497, 495.
Right. Yeah. So what they're doing is they're building like little cities almost where you can have office parks, you're going to have places to go to dinner, so you don't have to go into the downtown necessarily. And that's kind of like a trend that you're going to see. And I think that's going to actually even accelerate with obviously more people not, going into the larger cities. Commuter access points, which means like, as a place grow, try to look for the places that people might be able to commute from. Using Charlotte as an example, like, the growth is going where? West, Gastonia, right? Or you're in more Fort Mills, which is in South Carolina, but is actually a suburb of Charlotte. Work from home is another obviously major trend which came out of the pandemic, but you clearly, and for like us up here in New Jersey, you're seeing a willingness for people to go out a little bit further, buy almost like a bigger house, because they'll use that extra bedroom as a office, and it's not that painful if you have to commute to the city 2 or 3 times to do that long commute. And then the other obviously trend is the younger group that are willing to work from anywhere, because if they're working virtual, why do you have to, be in a particular place? So why is that important is, there's other commercial real estate assets like storage. People mobile, they might be willing to put things in storage and have a smaller apartment. So those are some of the things.
Hey, Jerry, if I could just throw one thing in. In Charlotte's interesting because I've been studying more as I'm pretty new to the area. They have the rail line, right? It's called the Lynx down here. It's kind of similar to the light rail in New Jersey. And the Lynx is the hub is in downtown Charlotte. That's kind of like the hub exchange location where everything switches. And then they have a line going to the north, which is the red line, which they have future expansions. And then they have another line that goes to UNC, which goes to the northeast. And then they have future projects where they want to extend it to Gaston County, all the way west to the airport. So the airport is going to be a station. And then from there, they were going to go a little more west to Gastonia. So if you can kind of just stick around and, since real estate is kind of like a long-term investments, you kind of want to look at also like where the city is planning to do expansions for rail, because everything along the rail has just been developed like crazy within Charlotte. And if there's a future expansion, you may maybe want to look at properties within that future expansion and then buy something there and then kind of wait for then the rail to kind of make it to you.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'm seeing that here in New Jersey. So like the town that I am, we have a train line that doesn't go direct into New York. You have to stop in Newark, which is not that big of a deal, but it's not the easiest thing in the world. But again, now you can see that they're building up around the train stations because again, people are they don't mind now commuting further out if they're not doing it as often. So finding out where light rails are going to be built and things like that are a perfect example. So I'll leave it off with actually a little last of like kind of case study. Those of you that are familiar with Tennessee, and for me, again, it was interesting because when I first started looking into multifamily, it was after a trip to Tennessee in 2019, I think, and Nashville. I went to Nashville. And I just, it was awesome. And then I was like, wow, this place is great, but I'm not going to be able to invest in here because there's a whole lot going on. So I basically just kind of took a map, and use this as an example, and looked at like where do you see growth growing elsewhere, right? And without really knowing anything, I kind of said, well, this to me makes a lot of sense, like Murfreesboro, right? There's a small airport over here. There's Middle Tennessee State, so you have a university. There was a lot of multifamily, and then there's this direct ability to get into Nashville. And it was kind of a, if you will, a little bit of a confirmation that I was looking at this correctly, because that's when I connected, with one of the operators that lived in New Jersey, Jason Rusi, and he ended up moving out and doing a property out there. And it was kind of like, wow, I literally know nothing about Nashville other than I went there, and I was able to pick like an area that turned out to be hot just by looking at maps. So it's definitely a tool. When you use that, you use knowledge of where things are being built and where things are opening, and it's a great way of kind of helping to path your way into success in the multifamily. Cool. So thank you guys. That was my presentation. But yeah, let's do it. A little bit of a discussion if anybody has, any comments or things that they look at specifically when they're looking at areas.
Jerry, there is like specific guidelines to successfully map out with numbers, so to speak. What you just did right now is excellent for. Is it to gauge something that a broker gave you, or are you looking for, like, let's say, a smaller unit in an area like Estonia, for example, right? I attended a boot camp for Rod Cleef one time, and he has like his guidelines of what you look for to make sure that you are basically targeting the right area. So like population of $100,000 people, is minimum. Something like a Walmart, a Target, a McDonald's, Starbucks was on his list, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? So besides looking for these things, do you look at, for example, the population first before you target the map, kind of thing, or how does it work in your eyes, in your perspective?
Yeah, so I'm actually looking for it, and I'll bring it down. So Neil Bawa puts together an awesome YouTube on this, and I'm gonna get the link over here. And it basically, it starts with a spreadsheet, and then you're looking for a certain percentage of population growth. You're looking for a certain percentage of jobs, and then you're also looking like the cost of a home too, right? Because if the cost of a home is very close to rent, then people are going to like, I'm just going to go get a house. So yeah, the metrics are fantastic. I got this here, but yeah, so obviously jobs, population growth, crime. That's another thing they have. There's Gonzalo, you probably remember this. There's like a score. I use Crime Spot, but there's another one. I forget the name of it.
The other one is kind of the one that's not really politically correct, is the justicemap.org.
Right.
Yeah. And then City Data is another good one.
City Data has a score.
City Data, yeah.
City Data is pretty awesome, actually. I use it very frequently.
Yeah. One thing that a lot of people don't talk about, which we kind of still look at it as when we're like rating cities, is the effects of climate change on a location, right?
Because, right?
Florida, for example, so many people buying stuff on the water in Florida, but climate change is going to exacerbate these types of weather events: hurricanes, flooding, rising sea levels, temperature. Right, it's going to get even hotter than it is now. So it's just some.
There's 30 countries around the world that look to invest in the United States. Like this is like high equity firms kind of thing, family offices across the world. 30 of them from Japan to Europe and stuff like that. And one of the matrices they look at when they invest in the United States is the climate change effects on that location. It's funny you mentioned that. This is why, for example, Atlanta, Georgia is more appealing than Florida by far, because it's not very close to the water, so to speak,
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
I think we were looking at something in Wilmington, North Carolina, and a lot of people stay away from that because, I think it was vacationing in OBX a couple of years ago, and I went to his restaurant and they had on the wall like all the various like large hurricanes that came, and you realize it happens every 5 years. It's not like it's like uncommon. Which is crazy. I don't know if anybody's been to OBX, but you're basically like out in the Atlantic Ocean. Like, I don't even know why you're allowed to build out there in the first place. Excellent. So, I guess, John, you talked about Greenville, North Carolina, and I looked at that a little bit too, and we haven't talked about this because people talk about beds and meds, like also that's another one, like beds being like, is it beds being like, I guess, like dorm rooms or schools or students, and then, the medical facilities. Another thing I did, which was cool, if you go on YouTube, like they actually have people that drive around through cities and video. And I did that with Charleston, North Carolina. And again, just by looking at the videos, like you can kind of actually like pinpoint some places. And when I went and visited, like it was like, oh yeah, this particular area makes a lot of sense. So I say that because originally I was looking at Charleston and there was a big medical MUSC, I think it's called, you can see that particular area. And now Charleston's a different story because there's zoning issues because it's an older town. You can't do Airbnbs and things like that. But so there's a lot of different tools that are out there. Jonathan, we should do it in Durham and map it out and see some of the spots where we got to go.
That might be a good idea.
Just an interesting fact, like some of the investors I talked to, Jerry, you know what I'm saying? They look at the current events with politics and not necessarily politics, but economical politics, so to speak, in the United States. So, for example, there's a law that was passed that stated that every single new vehicle that will be manufactured in the year 2035 has to be an electric car. And sure enough, investors turn to, Michigan, right? Michigan, the state that nobody wants to go there, right? Because what happened in 2008 and everything like that, got flooded with investors because they know all the auto manufacturers are out there, And all of a sudden, Dearborn, Michigan, and Detroit, there's no more multifamilies. People are dying for it, And I called a couple of investors and like, you have to go in the ghettos right now and rebuild something, in Detroit. So just another fact that people monitor the economical cycles, what happened in the United States. Another interesting fact that I just found out, especially about Columbus, Ohio, because I'm a big fan of the area, is the chip technology is being, concentrated in Columbus, in New Albany, and they're dumping over $70 billion over there right now. And right now it's becoming like sixth, fastest growing city in the United States or something like that. So just another trend to watch out for if you're looking to, finding where the growth is going to be at in the United States. Kind of thing.
Yeah, Columbus is another one. It's Ohio State University, so there's a lot of students. And a couple of finance companies have moved out there and put some of their call centers. That's actually interesting because I work in finance, but initially, like a lot of people were moving outsourcing to India and to different places, but then they found like there were certain challenges, like similar, like they have these monsoons in India that shut down, and you can't be shut down if you're in the finance. So a lot of places like Goldman Sachs never went overseas. They have a hub in Salt Lake City. And so, if you can find these little places that companies are moving to, you can follow them. Well, good, man. That was a good discussion.